Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon to you. And Ramadan Mubarak. May this be a blessed month of fasting for you. Welcome to this special edition of Ramadan Online. Stay connected. Hosted by the East London Mosque and London Muslim Center.
Ramadan Online. Stay connected to the East London Mosque.
East London Mosque and London Muslim Centre would love to say thank you to the following businesses and charities for sponsoring our Ramadan Online 2021 programme: Islamic Relief, Muntada Aid, Global Relief Trust, Penny Appeal, Muslim Aid, Human Relief Foundation, Muslim Burial Fund, Irani Taylor Solicitors, City Realtor, AWMA Architecture.
I will be your host and moderator for today's program. My name is Isma'il Kushkush. I'm a journalist, a contributor to the Global Reporting Center in Vancouver, Canada. I've written for the New York Times, the New Yorker, the Atlantic, Smithsonian, BBC, and others. And I'm coming to you today from Washington, D.C. in the United States. With us today are Sheikh Ahmad Saleh. He's the Imam of the Ma'awi al-Birir Islamic Complex in Khartoum, Sudan, who's joining us today from Ontario, Canada, from the Ibn Rushd Islamic Center, where he is a guest this Ramadan. He has studied the 7 Qir'at, verbalization schools of the Qur'an, starting in the famous traditional khalwa madrasa of Khursi in Sudan, the Institute of Wad Doleeb, and received a bachelor's and master's degree from the University of the Holy Qur'an and Islamic Sciences in Omdurman, Sudan. Also joining us today from Canada is Professor Michael Frishkopf, who is a professor of music at the University of Alberta. He is an ethnomusicologist, performer, and composer. His research interests include music of the Arab world, Sufi music, sound in Islamic ritual performance, sound therapies, music and religion, music in West Africa, and other topics. Today we'll discuss the life of the late Sudanese Shaykh Noreen Mohamed Siddiq, who passed away last year in a car accident.
Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, ملك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين.
When Shaykh Noreen Mohamed Siddiq recited the Qur'an, people around the world described his tone as sad, soulful, and bluesy. His unique sound made him one of the Muslim world's most popular reciters of the Qur'an. As a consequence, his death at the age of 38 in a car accident in Sudan in November 2020 was mourned from Africa to Asia to the United States and Europe. He picked up his tone studying in a traditional Quranic school, khalwa, in the village of Al-Farajab, west of the capital of Khartoum in the province of Kordofan in the mid-1990s. When he later moved to Khartoum, the capital, he led prayers in a number of the city's main mosques and caught people's attention. His fame spread once videos of him were uploaded to YouTube via Naqat Studio, a recording company in the capital, Khartoum.
سلام قولا من رب رحيم الله.
Sheikh Saleh Ahmed Saleh is the Imam of the Ma'awi al-Birir Islamic Complex in Khartoum. He's joining us today from the Ibn Rushd Islamic Center in Ontario, Canada, where he is a Ramadan guest. He studied in the famous Khursi Khalwa, or madrasa or seminary, in Western Sudan in Kordofan. We studied the 7 schools of verbalization of the Qur'an there, and then went on to study at the Wad Doleeb Institute, and then received a bachelor's and master's degree from the Holy Qur'an and Islamic Sciences University in Omdurman, Sudan. Assalamu alaikum, Shaykh Saleh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Shaykh Saleh, can you tell us about your relationship with the late Shaykh Noreen? ممكن تحدثنا بشيء ما عن علاقتك مع الشيخ نورين رحمة الله عليه.
بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. علاقتي بالأخ الشيخ نورين عليه رحمة الله رحمة واسعة، علاقة يعني امتدت لأكثر من 20 عاما.
My relationship with Shaykh Noreen goes back to 20 years.
فنشأنا في مناطق متقاربة من حيث السكنة، ثم مراكز متقاربة من حيث حفظ القرآن.
We grew up in neighboring areas, and then we studied the Quran in neighboring areas as well.
ثم التقينا بعد ذلك في المحافل التي تجمع حفظة القرآن وأئمة المساجد بالعاصمة الخرطوم.
Then we met at many of the occasions that brought the reciters and memorizers of the Quran together in the capital, Khartoum.
أما حياة الشيخ نورين مع القرآن فكانت حياة حافلة طيلة الوقت، كان لا يفتر ولا يعتذر عن مجلس للقرآن الكريم فيما أعلم، والله أعلم.
He had a lively life with the Quran and was dedicated to it.
فكان يقيم مجالس الاستماع في المساجد وفي المدارس ويرحل الرحلات البعيدة من أجل أن يسمع الناس كلام الله سبحانه وتعالى.
So he had gatherings where he recited the Quran, and he would also travel throughout the country when requested to recite the Quran.
وحتى يوم وفاته كان قادما من ولاية بعيدة من ولايات السودان تلبية لرغبة المستمعين لكتاب الله سبحانه وتعالى.
Even on the day of his passing, he was returning to the capital from a province up in the north where he was reciting the Quran at request to the people there. طيب يا شيخ صالح، ممكن تحدثنا يعني ماذا خسر العالم بوفاة الشيخ نورين؟ What has the world lost with the passing of Shaykh Noreen?
نعم، الذي يريد أن يعرف ماذا خسر العالم عن وفاة الشيخ نورين وبفقد الشيخ نورين فلينظر إلى منصات الاستماع لكتاب الله سبحانه وتعالى المنتشرة عبر الشبكة، فيجد أن الناس قد تأثروا تأثرا بليغا بسماعهم لخبر وفاة الشيخ نورين محمد صديق عليه رحمة الله.
If anyone wants to know what the world has lost with the passing of Shaykh Noreen, one only needs to look at the various internet platforms and the comments made about him. ماذا كان يميز صوت الشيخ نورين في رأيك? What distinguished his voice, his sound, in your opinion?
نعم، لصوت الشيخ نورين الذي يميزه تناسق هذا الصوت مع وجدان القارئ، يعني هو كان متناسقا تماما مع ما يجده هو من حلاوة لكتاب الله سبحانه وتعالى ومن عذوبة، فكانت تنعكس على من يستمع لتلاوته عليه رحمة الله.
There was a symmetry between the spiritual side of him and the his reciting of the Quran, and that reflected in his recitation. شكرا شيخ صالح. لو أمكن أن تعطينا مثالا للأذان في السودان.
إن شاء الله.
If you can, thank you, Shaykh Saleh, and if you can give us a sample of the adhan, the call for prayer from Sudan.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
We will listen to some recitation of the Qur'an from Shaykh Saleh according to the Qir'at of Ad-Duri, which is popular in Sudan, which Shaykh Saleh also has a recorded a recording of the Qur'an in the Duri that is broadcasted on Sudanese radio.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم طه ما أنزلنا عليك القرآن لتشقى إلا تذكرة لمن يخشى تنزيلا ممن خلق الأرض والسماوات العلى الرحمن على العرش استوى له ما في السماوات وما في الأرض وما بينهما وما تحت الثرى وإن تجهر بالقول فإنه يعلم السر وأخفى الله لا إله إلا هو له الأسماء الحسنى وهل أتاك حديث موسى إذ رأى نارا فقال لأهلهم كثوا إني آنست نارا لعلي آتيكم منها بقبس أو أجد على النار هدى فلما أتاها نودي يا موسى أني أنا ربك فاخلع عليك إنك بالواد المقدس طوى وأنا اخترتك فاستمع لما يوحى إنني أنا الله لا إله إلا أنا فاعبدني وأقم الصلاة لذكري صدق الله العظيم.
Shukran, Sheikh Saleh. Thank you, Sheikh Saleh. Shaykh Noreen's recitations and untimely death brought greater attention to a traditional African style and Sudanese style of reciting the Qur'an. In recent decades, Middle Eastern styles of reciting the Qur'an began to dominate in many regions in Africa and in the worldwide, especially in urban areas. Listeners of the Qur'an had access to recordings through vinyl records, shortwave radio broadcasts, audio cassette tapes, and CDs produced and distributed or sold by organizations largely from Egypt and Saudi Arabia. Globalization, migration to oil-rich countries in the Gulf, satellite TV, the internet, returning students from Egypt's prestigious Al-Azhar University and Saudi Arabia's Islamic University in Medina, and the impact of charities helped spread and popularize these Middle Eastern styles among many reciters globally, including in Africa, with some even excelling in this approach. Some saw and propagated it as more authentic and proper, which at times had been at the expense of local traditions. But with the internet and with younger generations through YouTube channels and social media, along with growing interest, has helped bring greater attention to traditional voices in Africa. Not only to the sounds, but also attention to different schools of verbalizing the Qur'an, Qir'at. The Qur'an for Muslims is believed to have been transmitted to 7 reliable Qira'at, 7 schools of verbalization that vary slightly from in how words are read. The most well-known of these schools, of course, is Hafs, which was mandated by the Ottomans in the lands that they ruled, and later widely taught in institutions of learnings and distributed through printed copies of the Qur'an produced in Cairo and Mecca. But in some parts of the Muslim world, especially in Africa, schools of verbalization of Qira'at continue to be used, such as Warsh, Qalawon, Susi, and Ad-Duri, especially in rural areas. Ad-Duri is the most common school Qira'ah in Sudan. To discuss this with us is Professor Michael Frishkopf from the University of Alberta in Canada. He's an ethnomusicologist, and his research interest is in Islamic spiritual sound. Thank you, Michael, for joining us. Islamic religious sound traditions such as the Qur'an, the recitation of the Qur'an, the adhan, the call for prayer, the dhikr recitations, nasheed, etc., said to reflect the sound traditions of each particular geographic area. What distinguishes the sound traditions of Sudan and the African Sahel and the Horn of Africa from the Middle East?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum and Ramadan Mubarak to you all. Thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure and an honor. What's interesting about the recitation of the Quran, Tilawa, is that it is always performed using tonal materials, melodic materials, but these are not specified in the primary sources, which are the Mus'haf itself, the Qira'at, which you mentioned, and then the Ahkam al-Tajweed. But in all of that, there's nothing that specifies exactly the tones or the melodies that should be used. In the Middle East, starting really in the early Islamic period, you find sort of the synergy among the various civilizations that came together, the emergence of a modal tradition, which later became known as maqam. And this maqam tradition took root in places like Medina, in Damascus, in Baghdad, in Cairo, later in Turkey, in Iran, and became known also by other names like Nauba or Taba in North Africa, Dastgah in Iran. But what they all have in common is a 7-tone scale, which often deploys what are known in English as quarter tones or ruba tone, which is the Arabic translation, that are sort of in between the tones that are used in European systems. But as you say, the tradition of tilawa tended to localize because it was transmitted orally, and it very naturally picked up on local sonic culture. So in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, where pentatonic scales often predominate, of different types, by the way, you sometimes find the tilawa is performed in those pentatonic scales, and that's the primary difference that we hear. As you mentioned also, with the rise of rapid travel, with the rise of recorded media, broadcast media, some of these local styles started to fade out. For one thing, they were regarded as less authentic, as you mentioned, and they were also overshadowed by the styles that resulted from famous Egyptian reciters like Abdul Basit, who traveled around the world. Recordings were disseminated. People were able to listen and to imitate, and saw the Egyptian and later also the Saudi styles as being somehow or other more proper. But in certain places, these traditional styles have continued. And those include this more pentatonic style, which is exemplified by Shaykh Noreen, Allah yarhamu, and Shaykh Saleh. It's a very beautiful style. In West Africa, you'll find slightly different ones. It's not that all of sub-Saharan Africa is one unified style necessarily. There are different styles. There's one reciter from Niger that I like very much named Mohamedou Sinusi. And he performs in a sort of pentatonic, hexatonic, that is six-tone style, very distinctive and very different. You would find the same sort of infusion of tonal materials in Chad or Anashid, in the Adhan. All of these are focused on the texts, and the texts remain, but there's an infusion of the local sonic culture. So that's the broad pattern. And I think you're right that with the rise of more decentralized media, as you get on the internet, it's possible for the revival of some of these other styles, which are really so beautiful. And for me, what's most meaningful is that as Tilawa spreads around the globe, it's bringing the same message. The Risala is one Risala. However, it's being made meaningful by being expressed in the tonal language of the people. And this is really what brings to it an even more powerful meaning. And the beauty is that it's able to do that sort of in its exterior form, while the inner meaning of Tawheed is maintained everywhere. So that, in short, is what's happening. And you'll hear also a very distinctive Turkish, for example, in Turkey, they use maqam, but they use it in a slightly different way. And you'll even hear the phonetics of the Turkish language often coming up in the recitation. You can tell that the reciter's language is Turkish. I just, yesterday, I was browsing some recordings and I found one actually by their president, Erdogan. And when he recites, you can very clearly tell that this is a Turkish speaker. Even though he may be respecting all of the rules, he's reciting the Mus'haf in a Qira'ah and he's using tajweed, but those do not specify all of these kind of minute tonal variables. And so what comes in is the timbral resources of the language, the tonal resources of the local sonic culture that sort of infuses it with a local sound. And this combination of the local and the global, I think, is very beautiful and a very striking example of how Islam was able to globalize and become meaningful to so many different people around the world.
No, thank you for that answer. If you could just briefly explain to us the difference between a maqam and a note.
Okay, a maqam, the best translation in English is probably mode. The maqam includes a set of pitches, or really intervals. For those of you who are musical, you'll know the difference. They can be transposed, and there's typically 7 notes. There can be more, it can go beyond an octave, but typically there's 7 notes in the octave that comprise each maqam. There are multiple maqamat, and the reciter can actually move from one to another. They can do this kind of modulation. A note is a constituent element. So the comparison should be between maqam on the one hand, and then tonal systems, which often aren't really named as such in sub-Saharan Africa. For example, I spent a long time in Ghana, and in Ghana, you find different kinds of tonal systems. They don't name them as scales per se, but they're using different forms of sometimes pentatonic, sometimes heptatonic, 7-tone, hexatonic. So there's different kinds of scales that ethnomusicologists like to talk about sometimes. But maqam is a very specific tradition that spread with Islam through to North Africa, Central Asia, to a certain extent South Asia, although their concept of rag is a bit different. But then, as I say, it became overlaid with this Middle Eastern style of recitation because it was felt to be more standard. So that's the difference. In sub-Saharan Africa, you do often find pentatonic, but not always. And there's many kinds of pentatonic. It isn't just one thing.
So when you hear Sheikh Noreen or Sheikh Saleh, I mean, can you analyze that for us when you hear the recitations in terms of music theory?
Well, I think one of the reasons some people may say it sounds bluesy is because it is using that pentatonic skeleton. And that's not an accident, because many of the African slaves who were brought to the New World were Muslims. And it's widely believed that they brought with them a lot of these musical materials, even though later on, for the most part, they were to convert to Christianity. But that these are sort of the elemental basis of things like the blues and other African-American forms. So that's part of the reason why I think at least people who are familiar with these Western forms like blues may say, oh, you know, it sounds bluesy. You find it often in West Africa, those same kinds of tonal patterns. I'm struck in the recitation also, it isn't just the tonal system, but also the expression. It's such a powerful expression, and the way the register will jump up. I know in one of Sheikh Saleh's recordings, and Shaykh Noreen also, they'll bring it up by an octave and sort of it intensifies. And there's an intensity to the voice that I think is also somewhat local. It's a bit hard to describe because it's a timbral phenomenon. It's not about the specific tones that you might find on the piano or not find on the piano. And incidentally, I think there's probably a lot of subtleties with the tonality. It isn't simply notes in the piano, whereas maqam has notes that are not on the piano. Every tonal system has their own nuances, their own way of ornamenting, and you hear that in the voices of the Sudanese reciters. But for me, what's really powerful about it is actually the character of the voice. That sort of the emotion is coming through, and I think it's very important that's why the localization of the tonal system is important, because it's through that voice. It's really all about the voice and the word, and that's what's communicating to the listener. So when they connect with that, then the emotion is transferred as well as the literal meaning of the Arabic.
Thank you, Professor Frishkopf, for that. That was quite enlightening.
You're very welcome.
So to close the program, I'd like to thank the East London Mosque, the Muslim London Center, for hosting this program and showing interest in this topic. I hope that you continue to have a blessed Ramadan, a month of fasting, and we'll end the program with a supplication dua from Sheikh Saleh.
Alhamdulillah الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. الحمد لله الذي جعلنا مسلمين. اللهم أحينا مسلمين وتوفنا مسلمين، لا مبدلين ولا مغيرين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد كلما ذكره الذاكرون وغفل عن ذكره الغافلون. اللهم اجعل القرآن العظيم ربيع قلوبنا ونور صدورنا وجلاء أحزاننا وذهاب همومنا وغمومنا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم علمنا منه ما جهلنا وذكرنا منه ما نسينا وارزقنا تلاوته آناء الليل وأطراف النهار على الوجه الذي يرضيك عنا، واجعله حجة لنا يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. اللهم انفعنا وارفعنا بالقرآن العظيم، واهدنا بما فيه من الآيات والذكر الحكيم، وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم. وتقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم. اللهم تقبل صيامنا وقيامنا وجعلنا من عتقاء هذا الشهر الكريم. اللهم تقبل صيامنا وقيامنا وجعلنا من عتقاء هذا الشهر الكريم. اللهم ارفع البلاء والوباء، اللهم ارفع البلاء والوباء. اللهم إن السماء سماؤك وإن الأرض أرضك وما بينهما لك، وهذا البلاء النازل بتقديرك فلا يصرفه إلا أنت، فاللهم اصرف البلاء وارفع الوباء عن خلقك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. اللهم اشف مرضانا ومرضى المسلمين، واغفر لموتانا وموتى المسلمين، واختم لنا بحسن الخاتمة أجمعين. وصل اللهم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون، وسلام على المرسلين، والحمد لله رب العالمين. آمين.
Ramadan Online. Stay connected to the East London Mosque.
The East London Mosque and London Muslim Centre would love to say thank you to the following businesses and charities for sponsoring our Ramadan Online 2021 programme: Islamic Relief, Muntada Aid, Global Relief Trust, Penny Appeal, Muslim Aid, Human Relief Foundation, Muslim Burial Fund, Irani Taylor Solicitors, City Realtor, AWMA Architecture.